Great, thanks for the intro, George. So along with great beaches and beautiful weather, California is widely known for our sky-high housing prices. Really decades of population growth paired with underproduction of housing has really led to this unprecedented housing crisis that continues to set records. And this pressure, well, it's felt at almost every income level. The crisis really disproportionately and most deeply impacts low-income communities and communities of color. Currently, over 150,000 Californians are unhoused, and Black and Indigenous communities are overrepresented in that population. And 1 in 5 households statewide spend more than half of their income on housing. And the pandemic has just further exacerbated an already dire crisis. So while policymakers in California almost universally recognize the need for more housing, there's really disagreement in how to move forward. Economists emphasize increasing the housing stock to meet this demand, asserting that market forces will eventually bring down prices, but policy solutions that only seek to increase the housing supply without prioritizing affordability and combating these displacement pressures that communities feel may further marginalize already vulnerable communities. A popular but misguided solution that has emerged is to streamline or exempt projects from environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which really threatens a key tool that vulnerable communities use to protect themselves from harmful development and have their voices heard on projects. So for my final project, I worked with California Environmental Justice Alliance, which is a statewide coalition of grassroots and community-based organizations that are focused on achieving environmental justice through policy advocacy. And the environmental justice movement seeks to combat and remedy the legacy of discriminatory planning decisions that have led to higher concentrations of toxic and polluting land uses in low-income communities and communities of color. And protecting CEQA has been at the core of CEJA's advocacy work for a while, but this kind of troubling increase in housing bills that seek to undercut CEQA has pushed CEJA to advocate more within the housing space. The housing justice movement, which really works to advance the rights of all people to live in affordable and thriving communities, is in many ways value aligned with the environmental justice movement, but their work has historically been relatively siloed. And so as policymakers are focusing on these housing solutions that undercut environmental protections, CEJA really recognized the need for taking a more intentional approach to their housing policy advocacy. And my work with CEJA focused on creating a comprehensive policy platform that shares a vision of housing justice solutions that also advance environmental justice values. So CEJA's their policy advocacy work really serves as the foundation for the platform. And so I began my research by reviewing their comment letters on housing bills from the last couple of years to get a sense of their policy priorities and their advocacy language. But recognizing that they are relatively new to the housing space, my research also explored kind of a wide range of housing policy approaches, looking at policy reports to analyses by housing economists. Another helpful resource was a number of recently published housing justice policy platforms at both the state and the national level, which laid out housing justice priorities, but showed really a lack of this health equity focus. And in some cases really go as far as including policies that are in direct opposition to CEJA's work, including CEQA streamlining. So to get a better sense of the housing justice priorities at the state level, I joined a statewide housing coalition, Housing Now. And during their twice-monthly calls, I really gained insight on what are the most pressing priorities for organizations across the state, and incorporated these solutions into the platform to really help create an aligned framework for CEJA to use to build alliances with these organizations moving forward. So conversations with core CEJA members also revealed their vision for this platform, which is really trying to move them beyond a reactionary work to protect environmental laws and towards a more proactive and solutions-oriented approach to housing. So my deliverable to CEJA really synthesized this research into a 20-page policy platform that lays out a comprehensive vision of solutions for California's housing crisis that center both environmental justice and housing justice values. And the platform's organized around 5 key priority focus areas, which are ensure safe and healthy housing, promote a comprehensive and a resilient approach to development, protect vulnerable tenants and communities, advance equitable housing development, and increase access, accountability, and community-led decision-making in planning. So within each of these focus areas, we laid out clear policy demands that identify the issues, as well as specific and concrete policy solutions. And many of these solutions echo current calls within the housing justice movement, like including ensuring strong tenant protections and services, to decommodifying housing and cultivating alternative ownership models, such as community land trusts and cooperative housing. But really, this platform is unique for the way it centers environmental justice to ensure that housing solutions create truly safe and healthy communities in California. And so for CEJA, this platform will really be a living document that lays out a unified approach to their housing advocacy work moving forward. And they're already using this platform to strengthen existing relationships and create new alliances, both in the housing justice space and also the environmental space. So over the next 2 weeks, we will be holding workshops with these organizations to get their feedback, but also educate allies on the value that this environmental justice lens can bring to housing work. And in June, CEJA will hold a press conference to really share this vision with California legislatures and the general public more broadly, to hopefully inspire more support for this vision. As development practitioners, we need to break down barriers that keep critical work siloed and recognize that all these movements for a more just and equitable future are aligned and stronger together. The fight for housing justice is truly inseparable from the fight for environmental justice. And so my hope with this platform is that the unique and ambitious vision that it puts forward will inspire collective advocacy that moves policymakers to center the needs of our most vulnerable communities and move the needle on combating this housing crisis to really create a brighter future for all Californians. Thank you.
And thank you. Excellent presentation. Questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. But let me ask, just a fundamental one. I'm going to be a little bit of be a little dense about this, but so you're saying that it's really not a trade-off between lower cost housing and the environment. I don't know. Help me understand why it's. I mean, we're always taught as I'm a recovering economist. We're taught that life is about trade-offs, and maybe you can't have it all. So where does all that come from, and how do you? What did you find that answers that?
So really the battle around CEQA, I think the core issue that CEJA has identified and why they've kind of pushed into the housing space is that, so CEQA, it is seen by some developers as being burdensome. Developers think that most things are burdensome, to be honest. And some, private citizens have maybe taken it upon themselves to use the legislative focus, like you can sue projects within CEQA, and there's a perception that CEQA lawsuits are holding back housing production. But there's been a number of studies that show that in some cases it may hold back individual projects, but on the whole, the kind of long entitlement processes and these kind of local decision making that the emphasis on local control really is much more burdensome and time consuming in terms of creating development or holding back housing development, that it shifts the focus to the wrong priority because it's an easier thing to attack. So it's not that it's just a trade-off, but it's that we need to kind of step back and look more comprehensively at how we are approaching this development in the first place, and the kind of burdensome local control that restricts zoning laws and land use laws that really provide more or are more of a barrier for housing than just CEQA alone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Yeah. Sorry, did you have something, David?
Yeah. Oh no, because I've been working on this for years, and I think that there are one thing that I agree with 100%. Zoning is the #1 problem. But also the number two problem is that we don't have that the time that they take to settle a suit is a realistic problem. So my feeling is trying to combine it together. The using of zoning that keeps the value of property very high. At the same time, when every time that someone has a problem, you have a suit. We have a system that is not really working very fast. And the problem with developers is that they are greedy and may be wrong. But another problem is that they are the only one we have. So how we can find a compromise, that is a big challenge. What do you think about all these initiatives that we have in Berkeley to change the zoning? What do you think about this? Or what do activists think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that it's making progress in the right direction. I think California was actually the first state, I mean, local jurisdictions in California were actually the first in the country to create this discriminatory zoning. So it's a step in the right direction to really combat the intention behind it, to be honest. I don't know that obviously just eliminating single family zoning doesn't immediately produce all the housing we need. But going back to your thing about streamlining these lawsuits, I think that the emphasis, there's agreement that maybe there are better ways of kind of strengthening CEQA or making it work better for everyone. But I think what CEHA really promotes is that you have to look at when we change these laws, who is being hurt by them. And the fact is that these local, like low-income communities that may be most affected by large scale developments, polluting developments, they also have the least amount of resources to be able to protect themselves, to be able to know about these, the course of action that they can take and be able to react in time to meet streamlined or shortened legislative windows. So it's, it makes it easier, yes, on the developers, but until we have other ways of ensuring that communities are able to protect themselves from these kind of compounding impacts, it has in many cases proven to be a tool that communities can use to protect themselves. So even though, yes, I'm seeing in the chat, Guillaume pointed out an article that CEHA is actually working on a piece to kind of combat that, to go into the Atlantic, that NIMBYs have used this as a tool for their own benefit, but that shouldn't, just eliminating as a tool for NIMBY people shouldn't be like the reason to also eliminate it as a critical tool for communities that need it the most.
All right, but just one more quick question. Glenn Yago has been asking for a while. Did you run into any kind of, is there a technology fix, if you would, or kind of, is that one way to kind of bring the two together, lower cost and environmental justice for housing? Types of materials, construction, methods, land use, land use.
Like in my research, yes, I mean, I read a little bit about it. That wasn't the focus of the platform. It was really like, these are demonstrating their key values, which they don't necessarily, CEHA doesn't want to promote one single way of getting there. But I know that there's a lot of action around maybe modular housing as a way to bring down housing costs for affordable housing. Another key area we didn't get really into within this platform is the role of labor unions, who are pretty powerful in the state, and the cost of labor is a significant portion of housing costs. So since I think we didn't want to stir the pot of that when they can be an ally in some ways, that we didn't dive too deeply into the labor side of things. But I think that is also an area that needs to be looked at, and kind of really bringing down construction costs, finding ways that we can increase the labor pool and hopefully make construction more efficient.
That would be a very interesting investigation, because one could assume that a certain portions of that labor pool are also affected by
exactly
substandard housing. So yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you very, very much. That was